the dialogue kicks off with Socrates speaking, and he says this: 1, 2, 3. But my dear Timaeus, where is the fourth of our banqueters from yesterday, who will now provide the feast? So he's speaking to Timaeus of Locri, which is in the south of Italy, Critias also of Athens, and Hermocrates of Syracuse. And they're all statesmen of some sort, and they have been speaking together the previous day with one other person who's disappeared. Timaeus remarks that he must be ill or he would be here. And they've been talking about something, and at the end of that day, Socrates has asked them for something, which they are meant to deliver today as the feast for today. So, so what they've been talking about yesterday is really the topic of Plato's most famous work, the Republic. And I'm not sure if we should understand it to be the original discourse on the Republic, or just a re-talking of that, those concepts. Socrates is going to summarize briefly what they spoke about. Critias says to him, yes, we know what you requested of us yesterday, but could you please just recount in summary what you spoke about yesterday first? And so he's going to recount that, and then he's going to reiterate what his request is. So we're going to briefly just, he's briefly just going to summarize and part of the Republic, not the whole lot of it, not all the aspects of it, but a part of it. And what he's talking about really is his idea of an ideal state, or the best civilization, the best constitution that you could put together in a state. And in this state, he's got guardians, who are the people whose job it is to guard the state, both internally and externally. And the very best of those guardians will be the rulers. They are kind of separated from the rest of the citizens, and a general rule for all of the citizens is that everybody has one occupation or craft. You don't get involved in a whole lot of things, and Plato believes that's a better setup. And then of the guardians are chosen because they're both spirited and philosophical to a rare degree. These people are then very extensively trained. Everybody has some general education in gymnastics and music, but these people have then follow-on education in geometry, mathematics, and finally dialectic. You don't become a guardian because it's a lucrative offer. There's really no money involved. You really have a living wage. You are not allowed any private property or gold and silver. And the guardian class all live together communally. The women guardians are trained the same as the men and have the same roles as the men, which is quite a forward-thinking idea. And a very controversial idea is that marriage and children are held in common. It's very communal living. Really, the idea is that in the guardian class, everybody is your family. You don't think of a particular group of people as particularly your family. And the children are promoted or demoted according to merit. So a child of a merchant who shows good promise can become a guardian, and a child of a guardian who doesn't show much promise will not become a guardian. So it's very merit-based. The very best of people will become the guardians of this state, and the rulers, the best of them, the rulers. And this is Socrates' view of the best constitution and the citizens. So he summarizes briefly what they were speaking about yesterday. And then he says, my feeling is that I'm looking at a picture, a beautiful picture, or a beautiful animal that's alive but not moving. And I would really like to see what I've described come alive. I would really like to see the guardians of this state in operation with other states, fighting other cities if that situation arose, or showing their qualities as you would expect from the system of education and training that we've delivered here. So Critias answers, yes, I've been thinking about this, and I think I have just the story to bring your picture alive. And so he brings in the story of the ancient Atlantis and ancient Athens. So the story of Atlantis is something that has taken legs in over the centuries, but it originates from this dialogue and from the follow-on dialogue of the Critias. So the story goes that when Critias was a young child, he heard the story from his grandfather, also called Critias. Critias's grandfather was a good friend of Solon, one of the very wise people of Athens, who 100 plus years earlier had brought democracy, really, or was part of bringing the first constitution to Athens and the movement towards democracy. And so the story goes that Solon at one point goes to Egypt. He goes to somewhere in the Nile Delta, a city called Timaeus, and he speaks to the Egyptian priests. And the Egyptian priests are very friendly towards him, and they explain that they feel a kinship with him because their founding goddess, who they called Neith, is really the same goddess as the founding goddess of Athens, who's Athena. And because of this, they feel a kinship. So Solon engages them in conversation, and he talks about what he knows about antiquity. And the Egyptian priests laugh at him and they say, "You Greeks know nothing about antiquity, because at long intervals there is a variation in the course of the heavenly bodies, and this causes catastrophe or cataclysms at long intervals that pretty much what presses the reset button and wipes humanity back to a starting point." And so this has happened many times. The people who live in this part of Egypt have escaped some of these calamities because just of the geography of where they live. There isn't much rainfall, and they can control the flow of the Nile to some extent with the irrigation systems. So they have survived some of these calamities, and they have records going way back, and they know something of antiquity that Solon does not know. And they want to share one story with him, which involves Athens, or an ancient Athens. And the story involves this great power of Atlantis. And it comes from 9,000 years before their time, or 11,500 years before our time. And so the story goes that there is a great power at that time called Atlantis, which people have tried to track down, but it sounds to me like it's an island out in the Atlantic Ocean beyond what he calls the pillars of Hercules, which is Rock of Gibraltar, and something on the other side, on the Moroccan side. And this was a huge empire. It was a dynasty of 10 kings, and it was very rich. It was a very seafaring place, and they had over time become very rich, very luxuriant, and perhaps become a bit corrupted by the luxury and the opulence of their state. Anyway, at one point they decided they were going to invade the Mediterranean area and Egypt, and not Egypt, but Mediterranean area and Europe and Asia generally. And at that time, there was also a very high civilization in Athens, and the people of Athens at time very closely resembled the description that Plato has in his Republic of this ideal state and the guardians. And in the end, they were the only ones that stood up to the people of Atlantis, and they finally defeated the people of Atlantis in the most heroic period of the history of Athens. And so they offer this story as an example of the greatest glory of Athens to Solon as his city, and really and Critias is offering it to Socrates as an example of how people closely resembling those of his ideal state fought an evil empire and prevailed. And so he stops at this point and says, okay, I think this would be a good story to fulfill what you're asking. And he's only given a summary of it. There's much more detail. And Socrates agrees. He says, yes, I think this will definitely fit the bill. And then Critias turns to Timaeus and says, okay, I will tell this story in detail, but it's not the right place to start. The right place to start is the creation of the universe and the bringing of humans into being, and a description of the nature of man, and then hand back to me to talk about these particular men. So it's certainly a very strange jump from where he is to jumping backwards to the creation of the universe, but this is how this dialogue goes. And before I jump into the cosmology, I think the overall way, because we're talking about a description of the cosmos and even getting into human biology, which is 2,500 years old and might sound very outdated and of no value to us. But I think the overall idea or picture he's trying to show is that there is a rational purpose and intelligent design to this universe, coming from a beneficent agency. And that this world is an image of something else from an unchanging and eternal realm. That this craftsman or demiurge imposed mathematical order on a pre-existent chaos to generate this ordered universe. And that we can learn something from this order, that the order goes all the way from the very highest, the cosmos, all the way down through the planets and the stars to the human. And we can learn something from the visible order of the cosmos to bring order to our own lives. The life of the human, as he will go on to describe, is very difficult. The life of the embodied soul is not easy. It's assailed by desires and pleasures and pains. And so this guidance we can get from the cosmos can be very helpful. And he's also going to say, he's not presenting it as fact, he's presenting it as a likely story. The cosmos is an image of something from another realm that's unchanging. And because it's an image, we cannot give facts about it, we can only tell a likely story. But nonetheless, that can be of use. So he hands over to Timaeus, and Timaeus starts by saying, this is indeed a very large task, and I'm going to start by praying to the gods and the goddesses to help me with this task. And then he starts with these words. So he wants to start by making this first division, so he says, what is that which is always and has no becoming? And what is that which
becoming but never in
and what is that which is always becoming but never in any way is? Let me just read that again. What is that which is always and has no becoming? And what is that which is always becoming but never in any way is? So he's talking about these two realms, a realm of being and a realm of becoming. In the realm of being, there's unchanging and eternal being. And in the realm of becoming, there is only change. Everything is changing. You can never point your finger and say that thing is, because it's already changed by the time you've said that. It's always changing, and in that sense, it never is. And so he goes on to propose a maker of this manifest cosmos. Because the cosmos is a generated thing, it must have a cause. And so he's going to first name the cause as this craftsman or demiurge. But this can be read in many different ways, and we'll speak about that a little bit later. But he says we know this from the words of the wise, and we have to take their account, not having any better story. But he starts by saying, now to discover the maker and the father of this universe is a hard task indeed, and having discovered him, it is impossible to describe him to everyone. So he's not going to go into too much detail here of who and what exactly this craftsman is. But he was good, and in the good, no envy ever arises about anything. And being devoid of envy, he desired that all things be as much like him as possible. So he's going to talk about there being some pre-existing chaos, and the craftsman wishing to make everything as good as him as possible will bring order to that chaos. I underlined as possible because it seems, there definitely seems to me at least, to be an emphasis that the craftsman, like any craftsman, is working with material, and there are limitations to material. And so he does not make it perfect and cannot make it perfect. He's working with materials that have some limitation. We're talking about something that's brought into being from a model that's eternal or unchanging. And because it is something that's brought into being, and because it's an image or a copy, it's a likeness, and we're only giving a likely account. So don't expect the account to be absolutely factual and to be completely consistent with itself, because it's not. So he then talks something of what is brought into order, and he says, finding the visible universe in a state not of rest, but of inharmonious and disorderly motion, this demiurge or craftsman brought it to order from disorder, as he judged order was in every way better. No work without intelligence will ever be more beautiful than one with intelligence, and it is impossible for something to gain intelligence without a soul. So he fashioned a universe by implanting intelligence in soul and soul in body, and this universe is a living being with soul and intelligence. So there is some pre-existing chaos, something that it's already existing, that this dialogue does not explain how that came to be. And the craftsman or the demiurge is going to bring order to that. And he wants to bring intelligent order. So he's going to create the world soul and then the world body, and place the soul in and through the body. So the body of the universe is going to be created from all of the contents of this chaos brought to order. And he describes a little bit of what this body is. The body of the cosmos is going to be a spherical shape as the most perfect shape. It will have no eyes or ears or limbs, because it has no need of this. There's nothing outside of it. All that's there is going to be used up in the making of the cosmos. So there's nothing outside of it. It has no need of defending itself. There is nothing to defend itself against. It is completely self-sufficient. It supplies its own nourishment from its own decay. It spins on its own axis as the perfect motion, but it has no other motion. And he describes this body first, but then he says, of course, the soul is created first as the elder and the more prominent of the two. So he's going to go on to talk about the world soul and what it's made of. This is a very short paragraph in the dialogue, and he's talking about things that he doesn't at all explain. They're explained somewhat in another dialogue called the Sophist, but he doesn't at all explain them here. All he says here is that the world's soul is made up of these three ingredients. One, an intermediary between indivisible being and divisible being. And to offer a suggestion on what he's talking about there, indivisible being is being from the realm of the unchanging and the eternal. So it's eternal, unchanging being from that realm. Divisible being is being in this realm, in the manifest realm. Temporary being. It's things that come into existence and then disappear. And the world soul is going to partake of both of these things, both the eternal being and the transient being. And then he also mentions this concept of sameness and difference, which again are explained more thoroughly in the Sophist. But I to offer what he's talking about here in terms of sameness in the realm of being and in the unchanging realm really points to the beings or the things of the realm of being, which never change. They're always the same as themselves. Whereas in our realm, things are changing all the time. So they're never fully the same as themselves, but they are somewhat recognizably the same. Otherwise, we would be very confused. So if you, let's say you meet somebody that you haven't met for 10 years, you recognize them as the same person. They're not exactly the same. Physically, they're not the same in terms of their ideas and thoughts. They're not exactly the same, but there's a recognizable sameness. And the same with all the things of our world. They change slowly, so they have a recognizable sameness. So again, the world soul partakes of both eternal sameness and this kind of changeable sameness, and difference fits into that sort of idea as well. So he mixes these things together in his mixing bowl, and he forms he sort of rolls it out into one long strip. So he's got one long strip of these ingredients. And I guess one further point on the idea of sameness and difference, which is going to come in as we into the soul sort of structure as we go along. He says somewhere that this idea of these ingredients somehow enable the soul to recognize the objects of reason and of sense perception, and make judgments involving the terms same and difference about both those orders. So they are part of the reasoning of the soul. So he's got this one long strip of mixture, and it's built in reason with being and same and difference, but he also wants to build in musical and geometrical harmony, because the soul should not just have reason in it, but also have harmony in it. And he's going to do this by marking off sections of this mixture to build in this geometric and musical harmony. And so in terms of geometrical sequences, he's going to, he introduces two of what he calls the perfect geometrical sequences, which is 1, 2, 4, and 8, or 2 to the power 0, 2 to the power 1, 2 to the power 2, and 2 to the power 3. And then a second sequence, 1, 3, 9, and 27, or 3 to the power 0, 3 to the power 1, 3 to the power 2, and 3 to the power 3. And if you lay those out in order, you have that top series, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, and 27. So he marks off these sequences into the world soul in order to build in geometrical harmony. And then he also marks off further sections to build in musical harmony. And I won't get into that too much. The picture on the right hand corner gives maybe a picture of what he's trying to do there. But he's building musical harmony into geometrical musical harmony into the soul, because the soul needs to know about reason, but it also needs to know about harmony. So we have one long strip, and we've got markings in it, and now we're going to create a structure. It's not a physical structure. The ingredients are not physical. They're not physical things, but he's going to build a structure out of this mixture. And so he's got one long strip which he divides lengthways in two. So we've got two long strips, and we bend the strips around to form two circles. So one circle is this, what I'm showing you is called an armillary sphere, and it's not quite accurate for what Plato was talking about, because it's a later version with the sun at the center. Plato's version would have had the earth at the center, but it's, I think, a good illustration. So he's got two strips. One strip is going to form the equator band that you see there, and the second strip is going to form a circle around the poles. In fact, they're not quite around the poles. It's more at a diagonal, but we'll use this illustration. We'll go with this illustration. The circle around the center is the prominent circle, and he calls that the circle of the same. The circle around the poles is the less prominent one, and he calls that the circle of the different. And the circle around the poles is going to be subdivided into seven circles. So on this is a model that was used in antiquity, and Plato would have had a model something like this, except that the earth would have been in the middle, and the next circle would contain the moon, then the sun, then Venus, then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The Greeks either didn't know about Uranus or Neptune, or didn't think them significant, but I think they perhaps only knew about those 5 planets. So as I said, these circles are the structure of the world's soul, but they're not a physical structure. But the soul has the power to move. It has the power of motion, self-motion, and so they're very instrumental in the movement of these heavenly bodies. The band around the equator is influential. Is where the fixed stars attach their motion, so that their motion is attached to that circle, and the motion of the planets and the sun and the moon and the earth are connected with the circles of the different, and so Earth is at the center, and he goes into some explanation as to the complex movement of the planets based on these 2 movements, and also on a third movement. So each of these planets and the stars are also going to be living beings with their own souls. So they will also contain souls, and he will refer to these shortly as the visible gods. So the cosmos itself has a soul and is a living creature, a living thing, a god, and so are the heavenly bodies. So is the sun and the moon and the stars. They all contain souls, and they're all living beings, visible gods. And their motion is complex because of the motions that those 2 souls bring to them. So that the world soul brings a combination of a movement of the circle of the same and the circle of the different, and the souls of the individual heavenly beings also bring extra motion, a spherical motion, a spinning motion to each of them, and also they can additionally move to either speed up or slow down the movement of the circle of the different. So he goes into some description of why the planets have different speeds and the complex patterns. But in the end, he says you really would need a good model, a good visual model to explain any more. So he leaves it at that. But at this point, we've created the world body. We've created the world soul, and the soul is stretched through the body. We've got the heavenly bodies with their own souls, which are living creatures, visible gods. So that's what we've got at the moment. And then he's going to turn to those living gods, and there's 2 kinds of gods, and say to them, well, I'm going to need your help in creating the other creatures which need to be part of this cosmos, that are needed to complete this cosmos. So I just spoke about the visible gods, the heavenly bodies. There are also the invisible gods, and these are really the Greek gods, the Olympian gods, the gods of the myths. And he's not going to say very much about these. He says it's beyond our powers to know of their origin. We only know of their stories from those who claim to be their descendants, and we have to take that account, not having anything else, though they offer no likely or necessary proof. Nonetheless, he does acknowledge their existence, and he's going to turn to these gods, both the visible and invisible, and say, okay, this cosmos is not going to be complete unless we create 3 other kinds of creatures: birds, water animals, and land animals. And land animals includes humans. I can't create these creatures, because if I do, they'll be too perfect, they'll be too immortal. And in fact, he says to the gods, you are not immortal, but you're pretty close to immortal, and you will not be dissolved unless I consent to that. But these other creatures are meant to be mortals, and so I cannot create them. But I will create the divine part of them, and then hand over to you to create the mortal part of them, and to weave the mortal and immortal parts together. So that is what he does. So he goes back to his mixing bowl, and he has some extra mixture, less pure than his original world soul mixture. but he uses that to create the human souls, and he divides it into souls equal to the number with the stars, allocated each soul to its particular star, and having mounted them as though in a chariot, he showed them the nature of the universe and told them the laws of destiny.
I'm going to turn you off.
It's just I think, a very beautiful sentence. I'll read it again. So this is the craftsman, the demiurge, who's mixed the mixture for the human souls, and then he divided into souls equal in number with the stars, allocated each soul to its particular star, and having mounted them as though in a chariot, he showed them the nature of the universe and told them the laws of destiny. So it does get a little bit controversial here. He says to give everybody a fair chance, everybody's first birth is going to be as a man, as a male, and the life of a human is not easy. An embodied soul has to contend with the realities of being immortal, and desires and passions and dangers and all sorts of things. So it's not necessarily easy to live a just life. If you don't live a just life, you're going to get reborn as a woman, and if it continues to go pear-shaped, you'll get reborn as a animal, and so you have to work back to perfect to your original state in order to come back to your original star. So until reason returns once more to your original best condition, you will continue this metamorphosis into different creatures. So he hands over to the gods to create the mortal part, and to weave the mortal and immortal together. And the dialogue goes, and into this body, subject to the flow of growth and decay, they fastened the orbits of the immortal soul. Plunged into this strong stream, the orbits were unable to control it, nor were they controlled by it, but suffered and caused violent emotions. So it seems to be a very disturbing experience to the soul to be embodied, and the soul's the soul of the human is like the soul of the world. It consists of these spheres, which the gods are going to put into the skull or the head. But these souls can be damaged by all that's going on in the body, by the commotion of the body, and can come to be ruled, and we can become to be ruled by our appetites and irrational desires. To make the bodies the gods borrowed from the world portions of fire, earth, water, and air, which need to be repaid later. And he describes they create the human head first of all, and it sounds like they might almost have stopped there, but the human head, if it didn't have a body, could get stuck in hollows and not be able to get out of them. So they give the head a body to carry it around. And it finishes this piece by saying, with proper education, the human can again understand the rational motions of the world soul and assimilate them to become orderly and temperate. But it's certainly not an easy journey. And he goes on from here to talk about sight and the mechanics of sight. But really, he says, the primary purpose of sight is to see the heavens and the cosmos, to discover number, to inquire into the nature of the universe, and to derive philosophy. So at this point, he pauses. We've already been through quite a story here, and he pauses to say, okay, I think we might have left something out. We've gone from a big picture to a smaller picture. We've gone from creating the cosmos from the world soul downwards, and he's going to now take a look at the other direction, from the previous or the existing chaos upwards. And he says we perhaps have left out one or two elements that are important here. So the first thing he's going to talk about is necessity, or the wandering cause. And he says, from the generation of this cosmos originated indeed in a mixture produced from the combination of necessity and nous. By nous you can read intelligent design or divine reason. Nous ruled over necessity by persuading her to lead most of what comes into being towards the very best. So what exactly necessity is, or the wandering cause, is a little bit mysterious. And in fact, necessity points really more to cause and effect, whereas the wandering cause points something more to sort of randomness or chaos. But I certainly read here that in bringing order to the disorder, not 100% order was possible. There still remains a little bit of randomness and chaos from that original chaos. So that is one of the elements. And the other element he's going to bring in is the receptacle of becoming. He says, but now we must present a third factor. It is the receptacle of all coming into being, like its nurse, a matrix for everything, divide of all character, invisible and formless. And the things which pass in and out of it are images of the eternal beings, which are imprinted from them in a wondrous way that is hard to describe. So we originally had being and becoming. Being is the model, the eternal realm, and becoming is this transient realm, an image. And now he says we need a third factor. In some ways, the image can't appear in nothing. An image must have something like a medium, like a mirror or the surface of a lake or something to reflect on. And that thing he's calling receptacle, a space for it to emerge into. And so this is what it will emerge into. The picture in the background there is from the Hubble telescope, the Eagle Nebula, which is called Pillars of Creation. Not a good image for this in the sense that this receptacle is meant to be invisible and formless, but it somehow came to mind when I was thinking about this. So he gives an example of something that would be a little bit like this. He talks about in making perfume, you have a base liquid which really ideally has no odor at all, so that when you add the perfume to it, it doesn't distort the odor you're trying to add. So the receptacle is a little bit like that. It allows the image to appear perfectly without impinging on it in any way. And he says, this receptacle is invisible and formless, so we cannot really detect it, but we apprehend it by a kind of spurious reasoning. And he also says the image comes to be in the receptacle, clinging on to being on pain of being nothing at all. So this temporary being appears and disappears in this matrix, in this receptacle, and clings to being on pain of being nothing at all. I like that. So just going back for a moment to what was there in the primitive chaos before order was imposed. This receptacle was filled with qualities, and they're not properly defined qualities. They're watery, fiery, airy, earth-type qualities in an unbalanced form. The four kinds are not fixed, but constantly change into each other. They have no proportion or measure. They only have traces of their proper nature. And the receptacle acts like a winnowing basket in shaking them, and the shaking tends to move the different kinds into their own distinct regions. And so that's what's there originally before order is brought. So the craftsman or demiurge brings order through shape and number. So the shape and number are two of the two ideal triangles according to Timaeus, and these four ideal shapes, one for fire, air, earth, and water. the two triangles are they're both right angle triangles. The isosceles triangle with the 45-degree angles, and the Scalise triangle with the angles of 60 and 30. And the triangle on the left is used in building the shapes of fire, air, and water, which all have triangular faces. And the triangle on the right is used to build the Earth cube. And so because they're not the same triangles, fire, air, and water can break down and rebuild into each other, but Earth cannot. You cannot make Earth out of broken down elements of the others. So he brings order to this chaos through number and shape in as much as possible. So insofar as the nature of necessity allowed under willing persuasion, we must realize that the God fitted them together entirely in due proportion, once he had precisely perfected them in this comprehensive manner. So the word persuasion is used a lot with necessity. The God is persuading necessity to cooperate, but it doesn't. It seems to me, at least, that is largely but not completely successful, and so there is an element of maybe randomness or chance still left in the system. So we've got 4 shapes, and these are the building blocks of everything that is in the manifest world. And so he's going to try to explain why we have such variety with only these 4 shapes. And so he says the variety is partly due to the fact that the shapes come in different sizes. So you can see in the top corner, at the top right hand side there, the shapes that have triangular faces can be built of different numbers of triangles. So it can be, the face can be built of 2 triangles or 6 triangles or 8 triangles. So we can have different sizes of those shapes, and similarly with the cube. And also the shapes are constantly being broken down and rebuilt into different shapes. So a number of elements of fire can be broken down and rebuilt into air or to water. So water, air, and fire are constantly breaking down and rebuilding each other. Earth is also constantly being broken down, but it can only rebuild into earth because it's a different triangle. The receptacle is still causing some shaking motion, causing this like for like movement. So the fire particles tend to try to move out to the outer edge of the cosmos, and the air, the water, the earth towards the middle, air and water in between. And so there's constant movement because they're breaking each other down, because they're all packed into a confined space. They're changing into each other, and they're trying to move towards their like regions. But if they change shape, their like region also changes. So it causes the state to never come to rest. We never come to a situation where everything is in its like region and everything stops. The movement keeps going, and so he then talks gives quite a bit of detail into different types of materials and how they are made from these shapes. And so apart from the fact that there are different size shapes, they can be mixed in various ways. Either fire of different shapes can be mixed together, or you can have earth with different elements mixed in with it, some fire or some water. So there's endless variety because there's quite a lot of diversity in just these 4 shapes, which can be broken down and reformed and have different sizes. So he talks about some different materials. So fire, for example, can come in the form of flame, glowing embers. Light, air, can come in the form of ether, mist, or gloom. Water, a liquid type or a fusible type, and the liquid type can be oil, wine, honey, or acid. And the fusible type, he puts metals under primarily water, but they will have different things mixed in as well. And so gold and copper and adamant come under fusible water. And then under earth, he's got stone and earthenware. soda and salt, and on and on. So he goes to he does try to explain the makeup of everything in the manifest world from these building blocks. And the final section, you'll be glad to hear, we're almost there. The final section, he talks about the human body, which I'm not going to get into. That's a whole different talk. But he will again explain the sensations and perceptions, the body organs, diseases of the body and soul, partly through these building blocks, and also the combining of necessity and reason in the workings of the human body, and how the gods designed this and built this. So the dialogue finishes with these words. So we may now declare that our discourse concerning the universe has at last come to an end. This cosmos has received mortal and immortal living beings and has been filled with them, and accordingly has become a visible living being, encompassing all that is visible, an image of whatever is known by nous, a perceptible God, supreme, intelligent, sublime, and perfect, this heaven, only begotten and one. So I think beautiful words to finish with. He clearly hasn't quite finished the task that was at the start of the dialogue, which was to bring the image of the Republic to life. But he hands over to Critias at that point, and that's a separate dialogue. Critias is going to go into more detail of these Atlantis and the ancient Athenians and that whole story. And that dialogue finishes kind of unexpectedly, kind of mid-sentence. It appears to be an unfinished dialogue. Perhaps it wasn't. It finishes with Zeus about to pronounce punishment on the Athenians for their behavior. And one theory is that, well, that's the end. That's the end of the story. That's where it needs to end. Another theory from a commentary I've been reading by Conford suggests that at this point, Plato's quite elderly. He's in his 70s, and he still has one great project on his mind, and that is the laws. And in some ways, the laws picks up from where Critias leaves off. So at the end of the Critias, there's going to be a cataclysm and a reset button. And at the beginning of book 3, Plato again goes back to that, and he says, where do we get political structure from? Where do we get our systems of government from? If we imagine the reset button pressed and all that's left is some hill farmers or hill shepherds, how do we come back to where we are? How does that build back up? And he goes through how that might happen, and then proposes a constitution for a new colony and laws for a new colony. So perhaps he decided halfway through the Critias, or he had finished the Critias, that it was time to move on to his great last project, the laws.